Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Fed Up, your no BS nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Marie, certified personal trainer and nutrition specialist, working with clients since 2014. After swimming up diet culture's bullshit stream for so many years, I am fed the absolute up with how miserable it's making people feel when we are supposed to be getting healthier. This podcast is here to help you gain your sanity back so you can stop yo-yoing once and for all and finally learn how to trust yourself so you can enjoy food again without fear or shame while still getting to your health goals. My aim is to teach you how to detect the BS in not just the food and diet industries, but in all realms of life, because I know that, like me, we are all just a little fed up. So without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome on back. Thank you so much for being here and bearing with me at the end of the year. I have been ringing 2025 in with some acute bronchitis, so we're finally feeling well enough to record and not sounding like a dying goose. So I'm hoping I don't sound too nasally and we don't have a coughing fit while recording this. This is like my 5th time attempting to record, and we're just going to go for it. This is the last time that I'm going to redo this intro. So I've got my tea here, and we are going to continue our discussion on how the organic industry has been lying to you. First off, we talked about GMOs part 1, and today we're going to continue GMOs for part 2. And then I do have a few more episodes in this Organic Lie series, so definitely stay tuned if this has been interesting to you. And if you are listening or you've been following along, or maybe this is the first episode you're listening to, thank you so much. I would love it if you would go to wherever you are listening from and leave an honest, hopefully positive review. Helps the sister out. I don't think I have any reviews yet, so I'm just a wee baby podcaster looking for some support. So if you love me, share it on your story on Instagram. You can tag my main page at Kayla Marie _fit. It all helps, so I appreciate that. Anyway, let's get into some GMO crops. First things first, we're going to talk about some specific crops that are GMO in the world, and we'll get into some specifics of what makes them GMO. And then we're going to talk about what would happen if the whole world went organic and what that would look like, good and bad. And then we'll talk about essentially why a lot of the start of the organic industry in general in like the early 1900s has really been, I don't want to say diminished, but has kind of trailed off into other things. And I want to apply some modern context here. So my goal after these episodes maybe is to save you some money and stop spending money on organic produce. But if it still just makes you feel good, or you happen to like a product that has the non-GMO project stamp or is organic, I'm not saying you cannot eat that product, okay? That would go against what I do teach in nutrition. One of my entire philosophies based around is that there are no good or bad foods. You can buy what you want to buy, eat what you want to eat. It's all good food. It's not going to hurt you if it's out on the shelves, essentially. So if you want to buy organic, that's up to you. If you don't, that's up to you. What I want to do is arm you with the facts of what organic means so that you're not buying organic thinking it means no pesticides. So we're going to be talking about pesticides today because there's this mass delusion that organic means no pesticides. So that's my goal from all of this, is not necessarily to riot and create an issue around people buying organic, because let's face it, it's all around us. I buy certain things that are organic because I shop at Costco and Rose Hours and a couple other places in my town that have these like natural whole foods, organic, whatever it may be. You can buy those products. I'm not saying not to, but I want you to understand what they mean. So that being said, there are essentially 2 types of GMOs. The GMOs that we're talking about that everyone thinks are bad are things that we're manipulating in a lab with more synthetic, quote unquote, synthetic means. However, other type of GMOs that we've talked about before is the selective breeding. So humans still are intervening with the natural genes by choosing the plants and the products, whatever it may be, whether it's agriculture or, animals. They're selecting the traits that they want that are desirable and breeding those things to create more of those traits. Okay, so that's technically a GMO. We're modifying the organism, but organic industry doesn't consider that GMO. Those are considered like organic approved GMOs. So let's talk about corn. I love corn. Corn in the US, we have the Corn Belt, which we'll talk about that a little bit, but most of the corn that we are growing in the US is not the corn that we are eating. Most of it is the corn that livestock is eating. We also use it for fuel, and only about 20% of the corn we eat in vegetable corn syrup type things like that. Corn is genetically modified to resist certain herbicides and insects. So what actually makes this corn GMO, which most corn you eat is going to be a GMO? Essentially, think of it like a vaccine. We are able to give the corn a vaccine that helps them produce a protein that is then toxic to certain pests. In the same way that we give humans a little dormant flu virus, a vaccine, and then we make little antibodies that make us resistant to that virus, that is what we're doing with corn. This allows us to use less chemical pesticides on the outside of said corn. This has been rigorously regulated, tested. It has been conclusively unharmful to humans and toxic to certain insects, which is what allows us to grow so much freaking corn and feed the world. So that's pretty cool. So why so much corn? US is the largest production of corn. We have the Corn Belt, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Nebraska, all of that. Flyover states, as they call them. This is not some huge ploy to poison us with corn. It's just that certain areas of the world are better known for growing certain crops. So the Corn Belt in the US is super ideal for producing corn because of the deep fertile soils, the rainfall, the climate, whatever it may be that makes corn corn. That's why we can grow so much of it. It has nothing to do with we're just making soybean or canola oil and then poisoning everybody. That's not the case here, okay? And I've heard this said a lot. People get nervous about how much corn we produce. And when we talk about high fructose corn syrup and corn syrup, that can be a whole different episode, but we're not going to get into it. We're going to talk about the evolution of corn. Where the hell is corn from? Corn does not exist in the wild as we know it, okay? It's actually a hybrid, basically, of a old ancient wild plant called the teosinte. I don't know how to pronounce it. Teosinte. So that is the mother of corn. Indigenous people cultivated it. They taught the European settlers about corn. It was not a white people food. And that's why we have maize and other things, right? Is that how you say it? Maize? I don't know. I think that's how you say it. It's been a while since I've taken any Spanish. So corn was first improved from this ancient wild plant that was hard and nearly impossible to eat. And we as in humans figured out that, I think it was some of these plants, some of them were born without a shell. Yeah, some of them were born without a hard shell, but these made some of the corn kernels easier to eat, basically, and then native tribes started planting them. And so this is often called the grain of the gods, and it's tough. It's less nutritious than modern corn, but over the course of thousands and thousands of years of basically choosing the biggest corns, the best corns, all of that stuff that happens over the course of a year, years and years and years of farming, now we have big, juicy, delicious corn. And then we were able to figure out how to modify a gene or give it a little vaccine to help it produce this protein to make it resistant to little buggies that want to eat it. So now we're able to make a lot of freaking corn. Corn has a cool history. I love corn. So moving on. Peaches. Peaches used to be mostly made of the stone and had a very small amount of edible flesh. It was like the size of a cherry. It mostly tasted like a lentil. It was a little bit sweet, but mostly salty, earthy. And today, peaches are 64 times larger, sweeter, and juicier. They were originally cultivated in China. And did you know peaches and nectarines are the same exact fruit? Nectarines just are missing a gene that causes the fuzz. So nectarines are basically like a recessive, hairless peach. And they're the same exact fruit. So if you don't like the fuzziness on peaches, just eat nectarines. All good. In the 1500s, the Spanish introduced peaches to the Americas, and through, again, selective peach breeding, they're firmer, they're darker in color, they have shorter fuzz than they used to, and they're much more delicious. So whether you synthetically modify it or modify it over thousands and thousands of years, we have been doing this for a long time, and it's not that weird, okay? It's produced more edible food. Get over it. Let's talk about potatoes. Taters. What's that, taters? Precious. Okay. Taters. Most of the potatoes you eat are not going to be GMO. However, there are a small amount of russet potatoes, russet Burbank and Ranger russets, or white russets are another breed of potato that have been GMO'd. And mostly all of the GMO is silencing genes that cause bruising or browning and reducing the amount of carcinogenic amino acids and lower sugar and starch levels. So again, most russet potatoes, Idahoan potatoes you buy are not going to be GMO. However, there's a few of them out there, and it's pretty cool because it helps increase shelf life, and we can, again, feed more of a population. Montana State University actually did this really cool thing where they were analyzing and, again, selectively breeding a bunch of potatoes, and they came up with the Huckleberry Gold potato. It's purple on the outside, like a huckleberry, gold on the inside, tastes like a golden potato, but it contains way less starch, so it has a lower glycemic index. This means it spikes your blood sugar less, which is really good for diabetics who love potatoes. It's considered non-GMO because it was created using traditional breeding methods, again, organic GMO. But I just like to bring those things up because when we're talking about genetically modified organisms, I don't think it's fair to neglect selective breeding because that technically is GMO. Also, when we're talking about GMOs, I want you to remember there's other things in the world that are quote unquote GMOs that are not food items like insulin. We're able to make that in a lab, synthesize it using man-made methods, and that's how we're able to give insulin to a whole bunch of people, which, again, you can argue, as we talked about in part 1, you can argue that's a quote-unquote bad thing because now all the diabetics are living longer, and that increases our population, which increases our pollution and all these other problems we were talking about. Again, this is a really interesting moral dilemma that we're considering here because as we're thinking about if all of our food only came from organic, feudal type farming and we got rid of GMOs, we got rid of things that were quote unquote synthetic and man-made, about half our population would be dead in less than a year. Let's put that in perspective. If the whole world went organic, when you look at a small organic farm versus a small conventional farm, which is most of the studies you see out there to do this, and they might look at the soil levels, the nitrogen, the carbon emissions, all of the things that they are saying, oh, organic farming is more sustainable, it's better for the environment. I'm not arguing when you consider that type of study design, you're going to see that result. Better soil, better, carbon emissions, things like that. However, what we need to understand is because organic farming requires far more land to produce the same yield, if the whole world went organic, we would increase overall carbon emissions and our pollution and everything else that is a problem, deforestation, because you need more land. Or you deal with way less land, which means way less food, which means more people die from starvation. Another thing is a lot of people argue about going meatless or eating less of our cattle and more of our plants. I'm not arguing that. Your heart health will probably thank you. But organic farming often use cow manure. So in addition to needing more land, if the whole world went organic, you would also need way more cows creating the fertilizer. Which, again, if we're not eating the cows, but we just have more cows, we need more land to host the cows. If it all needs to be free-range, pasture-raised cows and antibiotic-free, by the way, by the time you get food like chicken and whatnot, everything's antibiotic-free. So, don't let that term scare you. We'll talk about antibiotics in agriculture another time, another episode. Anyway, there's this huge dilemma that organic farming on a minute scale might appear to be better, healthier, more sustainable, but it's less sustainable. Now, when you look up sustainable food systems, it's a whole degree in higher education. It's a whole department. When they use the term sustainable so many times in a frickin' sentence, I'm looking up what do you mean by sustainable? And essentially what they're talking about is those small scale farms. You grow a couple of tomatoes in your backyard. That is probably healthier, quote unquote, if you measured that soil versus, soil that's been in conventional tomato farms that's been done 5, 6, 10 seasons. I don't know how many tomato seasons you can cultivate land for, but I digress. When you compare those two things, that doesn't really address the larger issue that if every single farm went organic, we wouldn't have enough land. We would put way more CO2 into the atmosphere. We would need more cows, which means more land, or we just produce way less food and people would starve. So let's talk about what the hell organic means. What the hell do sustainable food systems mean? Organic, a lot of times when you ask people, they think it means no pesticides. However, you are allowed to use pesticides in organic farming if those pesticides are derived from quote-unquote natural sources. As we know, the issue with this is natural does not mean better, healthier, or safer. Oftentimes, these natural-based pesticides are less effective, so you need more of them. They're less regulated and tested because we're working on the real pesticides that are effective, and most farmers use those because they specifically target the insects that they are needing to kill. Whereas natural pesticides, mind you, are oftentimes way more harmful for other species on accident because it's not always the best thing. So again, we know that natural does not mean better. So some common pesticides that are used in organic farming, neem oil, it's washed away in rain and sun, so it's kind of, again, way less effective. You'd have to spray it multiple times a day. Spinosad is an insecticide that tears apart an inside's guts and wrecks their nervous system, which works on pests, but also bees, things that they need to pollinate shit. It's organic though, because it's derived from bacteria, which is a natural source. You also might see, I think it's called rotenone. We're going to go with that. It is a plant-derived pesticide that is moderately toxic to humans, pretty toxic to fish, any aquatic life, and chronic exposure of this in humans and rats has been shown to have retardation, vomiting, depression, convulsions associated with Parkinson's. It's had an effect on reproductive health, which means it's an endocrine disruptor. So this is an organic pesticide. And it's all the same shit that the organic side is pesticides are endocrine disruptors. Yeah, your pesticides are too. It's an entire marketing ploy because they don't, even the Dirty Dozen, they test conventional produce for levels of pesticides, quote unquote. They don't even test organic food at all. I bet you if you did, you'd find similar levels. Anywho, when it is derived from natural sources, it doesn't matter. That's not what makes it healthier. Organic as a term started in the maybe even early 1800s originally, but then its popularity in the sense that we know it today really grew in like the 1940s. And it was a response to conventional food supermarkets and more industrialized farming practices. Even tractors were like on their shit list because it just wasn't natural. So originally, the organic movement focused on local farm-to-table type of things. It encouraged local and family farmers to create co-ops and provide food to their community in opposition of like these big supermarkets that were coming into play, right? Like Monsanto or whoever were producing a ton of food and these small town farmers were getting pushed out. Yes, that is a problem. So organic started as this method of like, fight the man, essentially. That doesn't mean it's better or healthier or more sustainable. It's just a method of fighting the man. But I digress. There is a lady she's called Lady Eve Balfour. She's considered a pioneer for organic farming because she published this article, book, whatever it was, The Living Soil. And she also founded the Soil Association later. But The Living Soil was a study she conducted by her lonesome self in London, where she had quote unquote conventional farm and then quote unquote an organic farm right next door. And then she like measured the soil levels and whatnot. And she's like, look, it's better if you're organic and natural and you just let the plants do what the plants are going to do with minimal intervention. So this is a quote that I'm reading. I think I just got it off Wikipedia when I was reading about Lady Balfour. It was based on an idea that farmers were over-reliant on fertilizers, that livestock, crops, and the soil should be treated as a whole system, and that natural farming produced food which was in some way more wholesome than food produced with more intensive methods. Lady Balfour believed that humanity's future and human health were dependent on how well the soil was treated and ran the experiment to generate scientific data that would support these beliefs. If you know anything about experimental design and about confirmation bias, you don't run an experiment to get data to support your hypothesis. A good scientist actually will run an experiment to gather data to almost contradict his hypothesis. Or you want to almost prove yourself wrong unless you can't. And you want to also see the data as objectively as you can, change your mind if it proves your hypothesis wrong, and reanalyze the data to then support whatever the data is showing. Not, let's generate scientific data to support my beliefs. Then she decided to travel to over 50 countries to spread her little message and essentially scared the public on like everything to do with industrial farming practices, like using pesticides. But again, if you're on a teeny tiny little farm, maybe pesticides aren't a big deal. But if you have acres and acres and acres and acres of corn across 4, 5, 6 states, and you have to feed millions of billions of people, that doesn't work. So, this is again the moral dilemma. Is it better to give us a lot of food? Or is it better to get rid of that and decrease our production? While at the same time, we're trying to like solve world hunger, right? That's the whole thing. So, anywhooser, I digress. Let's talk about in 2024, the organic industry global brought in about $231 billion, and the GMO food sales globally are about $133 billion. Regardless, that's a whole lot of money in the food system these days. A lot of times, what they find is people will buy overall less produce, fruits and veggies, because they can't afford organic foods. But remember that it is shown over and over and over again that higher plant intake equals a longer life, lower rates of cancer, lower rates of cardiovascular disease and other metabolic disease, healthier BMIs, all of these things. People don't have pesticide problems eating all this fruits and vegetables. We see over and over and over again that higher amounts of vegetable and fruit intake results in a better and longer life. If these people who are eating the most amount of produce are also eating the most amount of pesticides, why are they living longer? Food for thought, no pun intended. This pesticide fear is from a couple of studies that were done on the workers, the field workers who are inhaling it all day long. It is very different to drink water versus inhale water. Yes? Same. It is very different if you are out in the field as a farmer, as a grower, and you are spraying your crops every day versus eating some of the apples that have been washed from the pesticides. So there's that. And I want you to know, this whole series that I'm doing, again, is not to say don't buy your favorite products and let's create some black and white thinking. If anything has the non-GMO project label on it, or if anything's organic, don't buy it. No, I'm not saying that at all, because there's a lot of good products out there that just happen to be organic. I just want you to know what it actually means and the fact that you can choose either of these things and still make healthy choices. Same thing with canned produce, frozen produce. It doesn't have to be fresh. If you are living in an area where, like I am right now, avocados are $2.50 per avocado where I live. If I could buy some frozen frickin' avocado, I don't think avocados freeze well, but imagine I could. I would, okay? Because it'd be cheaper. It'll last longer because avocados, you have one day when they're perfectly ripe to eat them, right? So when you can buy frozen produce, do it because it's flash frozen at the peak of freshness and ripeness. It maintains its antioxidants because it's not exposed to oxygen. Oxygen is what gets rid of or starts oxygenating. Is that the word I'm looking for? Oxygenating things. That's why iron, rusts. It's oxygen. So frozen produce doesn't have that problem. Whereas as soon as you pick an apple, right, it's technically, as soon as it's ripe, it's now getting unripe, right? Canned produce might have some extra sugar and salt, but there's a lot of options out there that have no added sodium, no added sugars. But also, a little bit's not going to hurt you, all right? It's better to eat the freaking canned peaches with the extra 20 grams of sugar than to not have all the nutrients from said peaches. Same with a whole bunch of other food. If you need to put cheese or seasonings or ranch on your broccoli, that it helps you eat the broccoli, I'm going to put my stamp of approval on it. So, before I lose my voice completely, I hope this episode has helped you ease some of your worries about GMOs or whether or not you should be buying all organic or not. Here you are. Here are some facts. You make the decision. So, hope this helps. Love y'all. Have a good day.
Thanks so much for being here, friends. If you enjoyed this episode, please screenshot and tag me over on Instagram or leave a 5-star review wherever you are listening from. Your support means the world to me and only helps me get the no BS news out to more people. If you're interested in working with me in nutrition or personal training, check out my programs and courses on my website at kaylamariefitness.com and on Instagram at kaylamarie_fit. See you next week.